This is Joy Hancox from the Byrom projects, giving you a little bit more of the story that has been covered in videos 1 to 4. This is video 5, and I am just introducing myself to you. You may not have seen the other videos, but video 4 is especially connected with the story that I'm going to tell you now today. Now, I'm going to speak about another allegory. I've been very fortunate in having an opportunity to speak about these paintings, and I'm going to introduce and tell you how this came about. Now, I have spoken about the Reverend Neville Barker Cryer before, and he is one of the people that I need to introduce to you again today, because the video that I'm going to discuss in some detail, and the painting I'm going to talk about, is as a result of his visit on one occasion to me. Now, as you know, those of you that have watched my previous videos, I have said that he was visiting me. He was for 23 years. Actually, he was a reverend, but he was a very senior member of the Freemasonry movement. On this occasion, I was wanting to talk to him about a visit that I'd made to the British Library, and on this occasion I was talking about some of the illustrations that were involved with a manuscript called the Schweigart manuscript. And I had used several of those exhibits in that manuscript in my previous book, Kingdom First Stage. Now, there was a collection of illustrations in that manuscript. It was called the Schweigart manuscript. It had hermetic study of sacred geometry in it, which had been published in Germany in 1617 or 18. Now, accompanying that manuscript, which we call the Schweigart, were several drawings, and many of them I've used in my previous books, but I didn't use one because I didn't think it was suitable for the kind of story that I was telling at that time. However, it was part of the story, and Neville Barker Cryer must have remembered that, because sometime later he sent me a copy of pages from black and white pages from a book that he had obviously considered to be of importance to me. And in that book there were illustrations which he thought matched up to certain things that I was doing. And when I saw it, I could see the connection, because actually it matched up with the illustration that I didn't want to use in my previous productions of my books. And when I saw it, I thought, Neville, Reverend Neville Cryer, what are you doing sending that to me today? And I put it back in the envelope. I put the pages back in the envelope, and I filed it in one of his files, and I didn't look at it until sometime later. And when I say sometimes later, it was years later, actually. Now, I have to say that the Reverend Neville Barker Cryer died a few weeks before my film, where I was giving an interview in the Forbidden History series. And Neville Barker Cryer died within weeks of that being shown. And after that, I was invited by his widow to, because apparently the Reverend Cryer wanted me to have many of his own personal papers to do with studies that we'd been making over the years. And so I was invited to go and collect them from his widow, and did so. And it was vast. It was vast. And so much so, I was invited to also collect any books that I wanted from his vast library. And I did that too. And then what happened was that there was so much that I decided to have a section of my office devoted to his work. And whilst I was filing it, I found this letter that he'd sent to me with this illustration in it, which matched up to one of the Schweigart that we talked about earlier. And when I saw it, this is years after I'd shown it to him in the first place, I thought, well, I really should find out about this. And what I did was to discover that the pages that he'd sent to me were from a book called Landscape of Lies. And I managed to find a copy, because the book was published in 1989, and it was written by a man by the name of Peter Watson. But when I traced the book, it was described as a novel. And what happened was, I could see the connection with what Neville had sent to me, but when I looked at the book, there was a painting inside the cover, and the novel was a description of what had taken place as a result of this painting. It was an investigation into the contents and interpretation of that painting. I managed to get a copy of the book, and of course there was a part of the illustration on the front cover that reminded me very much of what Neville had sent to me and the free pages that he'd sent much earlier. Now, I managed to trace the book, as I've said, to a copy of the copy of the name of the book was Landscape of Lies, and as I've said, it was written by Peter Watson. Now, of course, this was all absolutely new to me, and when I looked inside the cover, there was a full copy of an allegorical painting. And as I looked at that painting, I felt really very disturbed. And the reason why I was disturbed was this painting looked to me as though a section of it was almost identical to the cover of my book that I had published in 2011, and that was called The Hidden Chapter. And I had on the cover of that book a copy that I'd managed to obtain of Tinton Abbey. And when I looked at Peter Watson's painting that he was describing in his own novel, there were certain features that were identical to the cover of my Hidden Chapter. And I'm going to show you actually the feature that matches my hidden chapter. It seemed to me that this book, this novel, may have something to do with Tintin itself. I didn't know, but when I read the inset of Peter Watson's book, it said that all the characters and the situations were fictitious, that anybody that he'd used as characters in the book were part of a mysterious story that he was about to tell about a painting. Now, what happened was, having been slightly disturbed about what I saw maybe a connection with my own earlier book, I made a study of this novel, and I analysed every page of that book. And you can see the analysis that I made of that book, and I also interpreted all the characters from the painting as he identified them in his novel. And I have to say that I did not recognize any of the features in his story as my own eyes interpreted what I was looking at. I could immediately see that there was a connection, and I was fairly accurate in my own assessment that I could identify it with my own work. And this was absolutely astounding to me, because here we have a copy of a painting that was introduced into a novel and by Peter Watson, and my interpretation of that story as he described it, I didn't recognize at all. And this really caused me some kind of distress in a way, because I looked up Peter Watson, and he's a very, very intellectual historian who's very, very well respected, and the story itself is absolutely fabulous. It's really very intriguing, but it did not match anything that I could recognize in my own interpretation of it. And I was pretty certain by a certain stage that I was correct in that the painting demonstrated that a feature of it was identical to my own cover of the hidden chapter. And so I was quite alarmed, because there were features in it that matched the allegory that I used in the Easter story, the Nuremberg allegory. The colour sequences were the same, and it looked to me as though it was almost a companion piece to that. And therefore, it was very important to me in any interpretation that I would wish to make about it. But Peter Watson was the author of this novel, and as I say, he was a very, very respected man, and in his own right as a historian, and he'd been a journalist, and he was very, very well known in the art world. So I had to set about contacting the publishers of his novel to see whether I could have a contact with this Peter Watson. And I have to say that I'm a member of the Authors Association, and to help me or to assist me with some of these investigations as to trying to trace Peter Watson, to find out whether I could use some of use the painting in my own work, I needed to have some kind of contact and approval to use in connection with copyright purposes. So the whole business became a major study for me. And as I say, Joe McCrum, who had been a member of the staff of the Authors Association, was very, very helpful to me in trying to contact Peter Watson and his publishers and agents if necessary. Now, at the same time, I wasn't having much really success in contacting him, but there were various editions of this book, and because I was so nervous about the copyright, I started buying up his books in case there was going to be a problem in reproducing anything to do with that novel. Because I thought, and in fact I've got over 31 copies and different editions that were published as the years went by. Because the first copy was published in 1989, and there were various editions that had been published since that time. And the last one was published in 2005. And I traced that copy, and it was published in New York, and I have to quote, it was published by Felony and Mayhem Press, which was a publisher based in New York. And what I did was to write to the publisher, who turned out to be the owner, and she was engaged in a correspondence with me for some time. And what I asked her was, had she sought and had she got permission to reproduce this painting, allegorical painting, in her edition. And I have to say, I'm not going to quote her word for word, because I've got her correspondence and it can all be checked if necessary. But she wrote back to me and said that she had tried to contact Peter Watson. I wrote to her in 2016, and she had published her book in 2005. And she had tried to get permission properly from him to reproduce whatever she wanted to produce in his book, in that edition, and she was able to tell me that she didn't get permission because he was good as said that she thought he'd owned it at one time, but she had sought permission to get the rights to use it, and she had not been successful. And her impression was that he at one time had owned the painting, that it had been sold at an auction, and he couldn't remember the name of the auction house, and the cover of his book was in the copyright of a certain other gentleman, and he couldn't remember who he was and anything to do with that. So, in other words, she'd drawn a blank. And so I am happy to understand that the copyright of the illustration and the painting is it doesn't have to be used as such, because there seems to be an anonymity about where it is now, and I have no idea where it is, and I don't know who the owner is. But so I'm quite happy to say that if the owner of that painting is anywhere out there, then I would pay any copyright fee that was necessary to be charged at that time. And I've used it in the Messenger, and I said virtually the same in the Messenger book. So Peter Watson is his novel is excellent, and I can recommend it to anybody as a story, as a mysterious story, but it's not how I see the painting. And this painting is an extension. It absolutely proves the allegorical interpretation that I offered for the Easter story, Nuremberg allegory. And I would like to move on now to give you an interpretation of that painting. And now we're going to talk about the actual allegory. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to share it with you. It is an extraordinary story. If you can imagine a tapestry that moves through time as a walking picture, as it were, continuing. This is a story upon a story upon a story that is there as a unit in itself, and it's stationary, is there before your very eyes. But there are various levels of stories within the principle of this tapestry. There I am calling it a tapestry, this allegory of a painting. Now, I have to mention at this point that whoever was responsible of putting this together was extremely knowledgeable, very, very knowledgeable about that particular period of history in Tintern itself. And I'm talking about Thomas Herbert, who was born in 1606 and died in 1681. And this is the person that accompanied King Charles I to his execution and beheading. And we're talking about Thomas Herbert, who owned and came to be the owner of the Hermetic College, I repeat, at Tintern, at the other end of the village in Nurtons. And he, I think, is the only person that was capable of putting all these different facets of the story together. I'm not saying that he was the finished artist, mind you, because I don't think he was. But he was the person that was able, and he was a sufficiently good artist to place everything together in one stationary allegory. Now, the first thing that I want to tell you is that it is in two halves, a left and a right. And it's divided visually by a figure of a monk in the middle of that painting. And at the base of his costumes, you will see a dog with 3 heads. And that is Cerberus, who was part of the legend of the Greek legend of Hades, and he is guarding the underworld. And if we look at the monk who is at whose feet the dogs are, I am calling him, I recognize him as the Reverend Roger Williams, and his family had purchased the manor of Usk in the middle 1500s, and if you remember, the manor of Usk was given by Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn, and also his last wife, before it was sold to the Williams family. And this Roger Williams is a descendant of that family, and actually he emigrated to the United States in the 1630s. He was a reverend in his own right of the Church of England, the newly constituted Church of England, and he was at that time very disenchanted by it, and he emigrated and founded the Baptist Church in America at Newport. So this is the figure of Roger Williams, who is there dividing the left from the right hand side of the allegory, suggesting that really there is treasure underground apart from the graves, and the point is that the Cerberus is preventing, so-called in the legend, the dead escaping anyway. So that is the central figure that divides the left from the right of this allegory. And then we must begin to think, well, what is the story of the left-hand side as opposed to the right-hand side? If we look at the left-hand side of the painting, and we look at the figure also of a monk to the left of the designated figure of Roger Williams, we have a monk standing whose face is concealed. We cannot identify him at all. He isn't there to be recognized in that by his face. His face is deliberately hidden. But if we look towards his feet, if we follow the monk gown to his feet, we will see, if you were able to look at it, and I'm going to see if we can show you what he is standing on, because this is absolutely incredible. He's standing on tiles, and those tiles have, if you look at it closely, they have swans painted on them, or they have swans as figures on the tiles. And if you look carefully, I think you will see that there are 6, and he's standing on those 6 tiles. And actually, when I saw that, I thought, oh, goodness me, because Shakespeare himself was called the Swan of Avon. And if you were to look at the feet that he is standing on those tiles, they haven't got shoes on. They are cloven feet, which of course a pig has cloven feet divided into 2, and a pig can be made into bacon. And there we have the figure of Bacon. I think that the figure is Francis Bacon, the real William Shakespeare. And he is there standing as a faceless monk holding books himself. And if we look carefully as to where he is standing on a ground, and there are flowers on the ground, and they can be identified as cowslips or oxlips, and they're a combination of those flowers. Now, what we have here then is a suggestion that this is the left-hand side of this allegory is something to do with Shakespeare himself, or Francis Bacon, however you want to look at it at this stage. Now, there he is standing surrounded by these flowers, and if you look to the left of him, you can see books on the floor around the barrel. And so it's beginning to get a bit serious to me, because it's suggesting that this allegory is something to do with not only Tintern, but there is an implication that is probably something to do with William Shakespeare. So hold on, hang on to your seatbelts, because actually there's more indications that that is the case. Because this actually, I can tell you now, before we go any further, that there are suggestions that this is a symbolic representation, one level, of the story of The Tempest. And The Tempest was first performed on Halloween, on October the 31st, 1611, at Whitehall in front of the King. And the next time it was performed, it was in 1612 at the wedding ceremony of James I's daughter, Elizabeth of Bohemia, who was the sister of Charles I. Sticking to the left-hand side of the painting, and after having had the clue to the flowers, which I identified as cowslips and oxlips, I really believe, was beginning to believe, that the whole thing on the left-hand side was dominantly featuring The Tempest as a play of Shakespeare. And so I'm going to remind you, I'm going to read a poem that was part of the Tempest play, and it confirmed it to me that I was right. Where the bee sucks, there suck I, in a cowslip's bed I lie. There I crouch when owls do cry, on the bat's back I do fly. After summer, merrily, merrily, merrily shall I live now, under the blossom that hangs on the bough. Now, when we look at the left-hand side of the page of the painting, there we have the cowslips, and if we travel our eyes or look to the left, near the figure of the red-robed gentleman, there we have a bat flying. Now, that means that we are talking about the Tempest play of Shakespeare / Bacon. Now, I have to, and in my imagination, I was looking at the, now sticking to the left-hand side of the page, of the painting, sorry, we have the figure of the red-robed gentleman, the bearded gentleman. Now, the main figure in the play, The Tempest, is Prospero. He's the magician. And it is said, and it's not just by me, but it's been said for many, many years, that that character is representative in modern terms, or in terms that could be identified with John Dee. John Dee was always regarded as a magus. And so the figure on the left-hand side of the page of the painting, I keep saying page, I don't mean page, I mean painting, is really the Prospero figure, and he's holding a rod. Now, we won't talk about the rod just for the minute, except just to confirm the passage that I've just read, where we have him, Prospero, holding a rod. He's holding a rod, and the bat's figure is just above it. And if you look at the Prospero figure who's holding the rod, he is holding his rod in a particular position, and that figure that he's holding the rod against is cutting the rod against his arm. And there is a passage in the Bible which says, if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. Something like that. And there is the Prospero figure holding the rod against the arm, across the arm of the figure that is half fish and half man. Now, that's not a character in the Tempest play, but it's a very, very important feature in this painting, because it stands for Merivale. And Merivale was the founder of the Merovingian dynasty. Now, we're going to leave that for a minute, because I want to concentrate on the left-hand side of this painting, because having read that phrase or passage from the play itself, I am settled in my mind by this time that we're talking about aspects of the Tempest play by Shakespeare. But this is where the level enters a different level of interpretation, because the Merivale figure of half fish and half man is nothing to do with Shakespeare himself. So what is he doing there? Now, as I say, Merivale was the founder of the Merovingian dynasty. Now, in Tintern and at Nerton's, and we have to refer to Roger Williams, who was the dividing character, dividing the left from the right. They had in their, if you like, manner of Usk, a priory which was dedicated to a Merovingian princess. Her name was Radegunda, Queen Radegunda, and she was a Merovingian princess that the priory in Usk was dedicated to. And she, as I say, was revered in such a way that there were French people and people from Europe who used to visit and pay respects to the priory in Usk because of Radegunda. Now, also, the whole business of Tudrick, who was another Merovingian, he was buried and or he lived, first of all, in a cave near to St. Michael's Church in Tintern. And he was a Merovingian as well. So the Merovingian dynasty was very much a part of the Tintern history. And so here we have Merivale on the left-hand side of the painting that is a feature considered to be very important in this painting. And in fact, the figure of Prospero is suggesting that there's something amiss with that line. Now, when I say that line, I'm talking about the genealogical line of the Merovingian dynasty. Now, I try not to make it complicated, but this area and this painting is in different layers, and this is because there was a very devoted set of families that were very much inclined to be devotees of this Merovingian line. And funnily enough, or not funnily enough, but it is a fact that the Tudor line of royalty wanted to associate themselves with the Merovingian dynasty. Queen Radegunda was dedicated at the Priory of Usk, of course, and we know the background of the Manor of Usk because in some ways it goes earlier than the Roger Williams dynasty, because really the manor was given by Henry VIII to Anne Boleyn and then his last wife, Catherine Parr. And here we have a dedicatee of Radegunda at the priory within the boundaries of Usk. And so this feature in this painting is not a minor thing. And so this Merivale figure that is positioned in the water, in the pond, by the side of Prospero, who's holding this rod which crosses the arm of Merivale, must be for a reason. What I have to say now is the Merovingian line, which is was very, very strong and powerful in France at the time, and the whole business to do with them is very much a feature of Tintern, because Tudric, an earlier member of the Merovingian dynasty, was supposed to have lived in a cave near to St. Michael's Church, and he was mortally wounded in a battle near to St. Michael's Church, and he is buried in Mathern, which is in Chepstow, very, very carefully when he died. Now that is a Merovingian king of the early 600s or 700s or something like that. And here we have Radegunda associated with the Manor of Usk, and here we have the Merivale figure, the original founder of the Merovingian line, here in this painting. And there is Prospero severing his arm, and we have, of course, in the St. Matthew chapter 5, a quote which says that if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off. And there is Prospero doing that very same thing, suggesting in the Merivale feature. So that must be for a reason. And given the other Merovingian featured names, which I've already mentioned, that must be a very important part of this painting. And I have to say that it is known that the Tudor line of royalty, they did associate themselves and like to be considered as a part of that dynasty. And of course, we have to consider these things in different levels when we're looking for a complete interpretation of this painting. We must leave that now. We must leave that and question why it was that the Merovingian line was considered so important in this painting. And I've mentioned, I've said that, what is his name? Tudrick was associated with the St. Michael's Church. And of course, we have the St. Michael's Church within the framework of the Abbey, with quoted in this, or visually appeared in this painting itself. So we have to dot about a bit. I'm saying we're concentrating on the left-hand side, but we have to glance at the right-hand side, because I've already mentioned Tudrick, who was associated with St. Michael's Church, which is on the right-hand side of the painting. Now, and we're quoting really very carefully aspects of the Tempest play. I want to say that to you again, because actually there is a feature from the Tempest positioned on the right hand side of the picture. And I'm asking you to look at the curtain rail on the right hand side above the altar. And if you look at the right hand side, you will see these rollers that are attached to the curtain. And right next to the end, there is one roller missing. And if you looked with a magnifying glass, you might have to use a magnifying glass, you will see a figure positioned between the end circle curtain rail and the third one, well, the next one. But there is a gap, and there is a figure there, a small figure, which is not a very pleasant one. It is a I interpret it as a witch, and I interpret it as Sycorax, the witch in the Tempest. And I have to say that some people and some scholars have already associated Sycorax with Queen Elizabeth I. The figure as identified, I identified it as the witch Sycorax from the Tempest, and she was not a very pleasant character. And Prospero is quotes a very interesting speech about her. Prospero being, in my opinion, a Dee-like figure. And if we think about Bacon as being the author of the plays, I could understand why he's describing Sycorax as a witch. And I'm going to quote a few lines from a speech that Prospero says about her. "This blue-eyed hag was hither brought with child, and here was left by the sailors. Thou, my slave, as thou reportest thyself, was then her servant, and for thou wast a spirit too delicate to act her earthly and abhorred commands." And I do know that there was a period in time where Bacon himself did consider his mother, Queen Elizabeth I, Sycorax in the character, as the character in the Prospero, in the Tempest story, considered that an apt quotation and a description of her at that time, because Bacon was under her thumb as a lawyer all his life, and she, in his view, managed him and his affairs. And that those 4 lines are descriptive of that behaviour as spoken by Prospero stroke D, whom Bacon had the greatest respect for. I'm switching now to the left-hand side of that painting, because behind Merove is a female that is standing with dressed in a gown, and you will see, if you look closely, you could see her red stocking. Now this is very, very important, because she is there. She's not a character of The Tempest, but I see her as John Dee's wife. And she is wearing that red stocking. Why is she there at all? Why does she have to figure in this painting at all? And am I right to think that she could be Dee's wife? Now, we have to cast and look now at the figure lying on the right hand side with a tree growing out of him. And that figure lying on the cowslip bed is a figure that can be described as from the house of Jesse. And that is the figure as represented in that format of the male figure lying down with a tree growing out of his middle. And that figure is a representative of a figure from the Jesse line, and the Jesse line is Jesse, really, in biblical terms, is the father of David from the house of David. And the Jesse line is really, the house of Jesse is really the biblical genealogy of the Jesus Christ. So the figure lying down naked with a tree growing from his navel is a representative of that Jesse line, and could be said, remembering, and we have to go back to the first video where we had the nativity scene at the top of that painting, and the figure of the Virgin Mary stroke Elizabeth I, and the figure in the middle of the boat, or the end of the boat, as a Francis Bacon figure, because he is the child of the Virgin Mary stroke Elizabeth I, who described herself in her own historic terms as the Virgin Queen, and Bacon therefore could be considered as the if she's the Virgin Queen, then he is the Jesus figure. And therefore, in the picture that we're discussing, that figure lying down is really the representative of the house of Jesse, And the house of Jesse is a description of the Jesus genealogy. So that figure could be thought of as Jesus. Now, when you look at that figure, he's leaning on a pillar. And if you look closely, he's leaning on a pillar with a cushion behind it. And that cushion is the same colour, red, as the stocking of the lady close to Merivale. And so it could be said that there is a link between them. And also the Prospero figure is wearing the same colour. And so, really speaking, the colours as created by this artist is binding some of these features together. And that lady, I'm calling her a lady, is John Dee's wife, could be said to be linked with the Jesse figure. And he is leaning on a pillar, and if you cast your eyes at the top of the figure, of the pillar, you will see an Adam and Eve figure, and at the side of those two there is a youth. And in my previous video we talked about Bacon having as Edward Kelly having a liaison relationship with John Dee's wife and producing a child. And I've already discussed that. And here you have a figure that could be said to be John Dee's wife, linked with the figure lying at the base of the pillar. That is another interpretation of Bacon himself. And Bacon is really Shakespeare. So here you have a figure on the right hand side of the painting that is a complement in a way to the figure in the left hand side of the painting, where he's standing on tiles with swans on them. And so, if you like, there is this depiction, hidden though it may be, and rather complex. It's behind this story at a different level, the story of the House of Jesse being the Tudor dynasty, like to be considered to be the house of part of the House of Jesse, which had a Merovingian link as well, so that it's all bound up with this complex relationships which the Tudors had amidst their complications of Henry VIII's wives and the changing of religion. And if we look at the right hand side of that altar in St. Michael's Church, we've recognized I recognize the Sycorax figure, but also is to do with the hanging of a curtain, and at the end of that curtain, if you look closely, there is an inverted crucifix behind the curtain. Part of it can be seen and is inverted, in other words, it's upside down. And this is why it's their position, because the Church of St. Michael's continued is Roman Catholic interests, despite the whole business of the change of religion to Protestant. Now, I realise that this is all quite complicated, but what we have here is in one stationary allegory, all this complication visually set out. Now, there is another level, because what we have, I haven't described some of the other figures that are in this painting, because behind, I'm going back to the left hand side of this painting again, we have the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is Cranmer at the time, and also at the side of him Martin Bucer, who is a German Protestant supporter of Cranmer. Cranmer was the person who was the godfather of Queen Elizabeth I. And he and Bucer, and also John Hooper, who is standing at the side of the St. Michael's Church, dressed in blue with the Mercury symbols sticking out from his legs at the bottom. They were all condemned to death and executed or burnt by Mary I, half-sister of Elizabeth I. And she, when she assumed and took over from her teenage brother, Edward VI, because he died at the age of 15, and she succeeded him, and she reverted back to the Roman Catholic religion in her brief reign. And during that time, she, in restoration as it were, Tintern Abbey already half destroyed, she executed and charged and treasoned and burnt some of the people who had supported Henry VIII in his changeover of religion. Now that I've tried to explain some of these features, but it is very, very complex. But at the same time, is there historically to be discussed and looked at, and it is there for anybody to study closely. But at the same time, you have to say Thomas Herbert died in 1681, and he must have left that main structure of that painting behind in Nertons, or it must have been roundabout and accessible to Oliver Lodge, the son of Sir Oliver Lodge, the physicist, who lived at Nertons from 1912 to 1918. And his father rented the property at that time, but I have firmly come to the conclusion that that Nertons property was the, if you like, a caretaker's resident. I don't mean caretakers in that, but it went back to the Hermetic College, and it was a residence for like-minded souls from that time. And this painting and other factors were there in that property for, well, since the 1600s. So that really is a summary of this painting, which is really very, very complex, but the levels are there within that painting. This painting is discussed very carefully in the messenger book. I've done the best I can in a short space of time to explain these features, and I may not have been absolutely clear, but I've done the best I can with a very complex painting. And I do think that Thomas Herbert was the only person that could have put it together. How Watson got hold of that painting, I wouldn't know. Not really. So he's done a very good story of his own, but I think that this is the real interpretation.